All right. So jumping right into it, as Anthony said, I work for Still Pro Equipment. I'm an engineer. We're based out of Thompson, Georgia. We also just acquired Case Horticulture, so we offer equipment from their line of equipment as well. Um, Jumping right into it. So the goal of Leap and the goal of Stilt Pro as well is to address one of the major problems that wholesale nursery growers face. And that's labor, acquiring and retaining labor. Um, One of the solutions for that problem is automation because it not only reduces the difficulty of the labor, making the work more enjoyable, but also the amount of labor involved. So today I want to go over some conceptual tools about how you can look at your nursery production and decide where automation fits in and hopefully help increase that adoption, kind of giving people that knowledge so they can use these tools to figure out the implementation of automation on their nursery. The first thing that I'd like to go over is this concept of what is value added work versus non-value added work. The best way to determine this is to ask yourself three questions on the step that you're doing to the product at any given time. After you complete that step, is the customer going to be willing to pay more for that product after you've completed it? Does the step transform the product in some way? And are you doing it right the first time? So if you're thinking about plants, you might be able to sell, hundreds of seeds for the same price that you sell one potted plant. But obviously you could get 100 plants from those seeds. But every time you take that seed through a process and transform it, the customer is willing to pay more for it. So you're adding value. Um, and from that concept, I'd like to introduce this um, concept of lean production with a story that I read in a book called The Lean Farm. Something really interesting about Japanese language is that the word for move and the word for work is the same. And in fact, it's written exactly the same, except for there's a symbol here on the front of the work word that's a radical, and that denotes that it's a human doing it. So there's movement with human intention is really how they're defining their word for work. And you can kind of think about that and how that might have impacted the culture in Japan when Toyota was starting out and building factories in Japan to build their cars. You can kind of think about when you're working, if you're moving around a lot, you feel and you have a sense that you're working really hard, but all of that movement may not be translating into value for the customer. So, with that in mind, they honed in a system that's been called lean production, and that led to them over time becoming one of the most profitable and largest car companies in the world. And what's cool is that those same principles can be applied to nurseries as well. So, to define lean manufacturing, it's a process that you focus on eliminating waste. And waste is defined as anything that doesn't add value to the product. So if it doesn't answer those three questions, if it doesn't um, merit more money from your customer, if it's not completed the first time correctly, and if it's not transforming your product, then it's defined as waste. So with that in mind, another cool thing I learned from the Lean Farm book is this example of Shingo's bolt. So a Japanese engineer, Shingo, um, he said that it's only the last turn of the bolt that tightens it. The rest is just movement. And when I first read that, it was pretty interesting. So I'm working with bolts all day, and if you're bolting two panels together, I could, choose a really long bolt or a really short bolt. It doesn't matter at the very end, that last step is what tightens it. So all of this extra, turning of the wrench or turning of your power tool is just extraneous movement. And if you start to think about like how do you identify this wasted motion, in a nursery, sometimes it's really easy to identify wasted movement. Like if you've ever walked down a path and you see a path worn down right next to the path that's been paved, that's because everybody realizes, hey, I'm trying to get over here to this stoplight. I don't need to walk down these bricks, right? But as systems grow in complexity and size, like a large nursery, it gets way more difficult to identify all these little places where you could be eliminating movement out of your system. So another tool that engineers use to kind of identify this is called a spaghetti diagram. And don't let me get you bogged down in like the specifics of this example, but just kind of look at it conceptually. This is, a car battery manufacturing unit, but they have all their production units and their actions, and then they're monitoring the flow of the product. And so they're drawing lines in between each of these units. And once you map this all out, you can start to see crosses and double bags, and these kind of start to clear up that there might be bottlenecks and better layouts. So with the spaghetti diagram, you can start to make a better layout. And as you can see here, they have a more U-shaped layout where everything's in line. There's no back and forth, and there's no crisscrosses. And this U-shape is actually really common across lots of factories, and you see it in manufacturing. So with those three concepts kind of in mind, what adds value, what doesn't, thinking about wasted movement in general, and then thinking about this concept of a spaghetti diagram, I'd like to talk about a customer of ours, use them as a case study. They're a small nursery in North Alabama. They're called the Nursery at Hurricane Creek. They have one of our small potting machines. And then after they had that potting machine for a little while, they ended up getting a conveyor. So if you look at like a conceptual view of their layout before they got the conveyor, so just imagine these green dots are pots, and then all of them are flowing to the right. These blue dots are workers. So this first worker on the left is taking liners, small plants, and putting them in pots. And then those are getting shifted over on a table into the to the second worker, where they're actually taking that liner out, filling the pot, placing it to the side, fertilizer's getting added, and then it's getting sent off on a trailer. So already looking at this, just talking through the steps, you can notice that when this first person is placing the liner into the empty pot, the second person winds up just taking it right back out so they can fill soil into the pot. So already we've started to see, okay, that's a step that's, you could say it's not being done correctly the first time, or it's just extraneous movement of that liner in and out of that pot when the person ahead of the person potting or the person potting could be putting that liner in. And another thing that you can do, just looking at this layout, is take a look at the movement of the workers, kind of draw that out. And then just thinking about the movement of the products themselves, the pots themselves, and how they're shifting around, and how the workers are having to shift back and forth to reach and grab these pots and move them along the process. So after they bought their conveyor, you can see that they've kind of, you hear this jargon term a lot of times probably, is like streamline your production. Well, this is a really concrete and just visual example of how that works. So you have a person here at the potting machine, they're filling the pots, sending them down the conveyor. The second person's putting the liners into the pot. So you remove that extra step that I mentioned before. And then the third person's putting them on, putting fertilizer in them and then sending them off on the trailer. When you diagram their movement here, it's a lot tighter, more constrained. And then one thing I forgot to mention is this balances it out. If we look at like the last slide, you can see there's a lot more pots building up at this stage of the process, and that can actually cause a bottleneck or a buildup, and it creates kind of excess stress on that worker who is the buildup. But the conveyor belt can set the pace and eliminate that buildup. So um, that's the example of how, taking those three concepts that I talked about in the beginning and kind of applying them, more tactically as we go down the process here. Um, if you're looking at, a specific piece of equipment like a conveyor for your nursery, then you kind of get into the more technical details. Do you need a specialized conveyor? Like Hurricane Creek has a general just belt conveyor, but sometimes you can use like a soil conveyor or a water tunnel, which has a more specific use. But those are locked down to being used for that function in your nursery. And then you can also have portable conveyors where they're more, general use, and you can actually get more use of the equipment throughout your nursery. And then you're going to want to look at like infrastructure limitations, your roadways, your power, different stuff like that. So real quick recap, a lot of the concepts that I was talking about in the beginning, I got from the Lean Farm, which is a really great, you know, it condenses this information of lean production and then applies it specifically to agriculture, which I think is really cool. If you want to go deeper into those concepts of what lean production is and like what Toyota did to become really, really good at producing cars, then Jeffrey Liker and The Toyota Way is a great book to really look at the history of that and look at how it was implemented. So now we can open up for questions.
Excellent, Jeffrey. Thank you very much. Does anyone from the field have a question? You can either just sort of, state your name, perhaps where you're from, and then your question, or you can write it in the chat. I'll give you a few seconds before I talk about my question.
See, James has his hand raised.
Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead, James.
yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. That was an excellent presentation. It was really interesting. So I
Thank you.
liked how you tracked, or I assume you used some sort of tracking device to do those spaghetti lines where how the people move back and forth. Is that a technology that's pretty common now for tracking people and movement in a space?
Um, I don't know. So full disclosure, that slide, I did not use a tracking system. So I talked to D at Hurricane Creek. Um, I do like that idea though, of using like, and I'm sure they've done that somewhere, but I talked to D, the owner of Hurricane Creek, and watched videos of his setup. This picture right here, um, at the top, if everybody can see that, that's actually kind of a middle point between them having their conveyor and them improving on their process. So you can see the person potting had the liners actually right next to them. So they were in a video that I'd watched prior, putting the liners in, taking them back out. But getting back to your question, um, yeah, so you can learn a lot just watching. That's that's a really cool idea about the technology of tracking and using something advanced, but you can learn a lot just watching, whether it's videos or just making sure that you're watching or even doing the work yourself, just jumping in. Um, and that can tell you a bunch about like you'll definitely notice, okay, hey, I'm doubling back here, or people are crashing here, there's crosses. So um, that's what I would say to that. And then as far as like a cool tracking system, I think where that would be really awesome is the product itself, and probably uh, you could see how pots or liners or any type of any part of the production system is moving. Um,
Yeah, because part of a lot of our data analysis is going to be recording time it takes to do tasks. And to
mhm.
quantify that even further with like, because I can imagine you could probably calculate if that were actual pathways people were taking, you could calculate the linear length of those spaghetti lines.
Yeah.
And yeah, all kinds of cool stuff you can get from that if that, yeah. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, this is Tom with Still Pro as well. One thing that Jeffrey kind of glossed over that may be worth noting, as we've been working with Hurricane Creek, they've been iterating. So it's not we start, come up with an idea, implement, and then finish. They've been working and changing and refining and seeing what works and what doesn't. And it's pretty interesting to see how that's progressed. I mean, when they started, they had no potting equipment and they were filling by hand, added equipment to automate potting, and then saw the next bottleneck. And then they're continuously going through and eliminating what they see as the most like current or the most pressing area where they can see improvement, and they keep adding and improving over time. And it does it in a really comfortable way and without having to make a bunch of really big decisions right at the beginning and have to live with them. They're making small incremental changes to make a difference.
So along those lines, when you all work with them, do you try to get a giant plan? Say, for example, this is the potting machine, this is the conveyor, but in the future, in the next 5 to 10 years, this is what your entire production area could look like, automated. Or do they sort of just keep coming back to you and saying, I think we should add something else? And how does that whole relationship develop?
I would say it's more incremental, like especially 5 years down the road. I've been so talking to D, he's really interested in mixing. So like there's different functions, obviously. So he in a lot of different these small tree nurseries, they'll talk about like or different nurseries with the potting media, they'll really want to justify a mixer, which would go before this potting line. And because of the way freight works with soil coming in media. But Tom could probably speak about the whole process, but I know like talking to D Murphy at Hurricane Creek about what's next. He hasn't talked to me about like a more of a broad scope plan, but it's just like how do we keep chipping away at this and making it more efficient and more efficient.
You?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So there's obviously a place for large, complicated, complete systems, but we're finding a lot of people just want to get started, and by getting started, if we can start to just show them the beginning of the way, then we can work through it over time. So yeah, I mean, we have the ability to, other manufacturers, a lot of people have the ability to build out these complex things, but they get really expensive really quick, and you often don't always know how the results are going to look at the end, and then your business is changing over time as well. It's not always going to be the same, and so if we can get in and just start, I think that's a big thing. And then another thing to note, these are like what we kind of showed here, like with the spaghetti diagram. They aren't like complicated ways to analyze a problem. I mean, somebody could go out today and with a piece of paper and write down things and see value from that piece of paper and come up with things that they can make changes and make improvements. And a lot of them aren't even spending any money. You can identify waste and identify areas that are just inefficient and make a change to your process, and you haven't spent any money, but you've improved your bottom line and you've improved how the operators work and give a better work experience there. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, definitely.
We're not that fancy. We like to keep it a little simple and just get started. I think that's a big thing. If we can get started and push through, I think it helps everybody. So
Yeah, that's excellent. I have some follow-up questions, but I'll let anyone else ask if they've got some questions before I sort of steal all the air.
Tom and Jeffrey, this is Margarita Velandia. I want to ask you, you right away said, of course, there are financial constraints, right? They go little by little because there's an investment that they're gonna make when they adopt a new technology. What do you think it's I mean, of course, it's curiosity, but is it like because they have a labor constraint? What is moving them when they're making these business decisions? Because they are making an investment on a new technology. I'm assuming they have sat down and see this is like how much labor we're saving and how are we redistributing that labor. What is the thought process? Because there has to be a return on investment because they're putting money on the when they adopt each of these technologies. Have you talked to them about, I guess, what's the business plan and that incremental adoption? How much is financial constraint? And what are they solving? Is it like really they don't have the labor and then they are trying just to make it more efficient because they have a labor constraint? Maybe I'm asking too many questions, but I don't know if you talk with them because you guys have to talk with money with them, right?
So money is definitely part of the equation. I think what was interesting in a conversation that I had with Dee, who's the owner in Hurricane Creek, was just I don't want to say it's emotional, but the more like the benefit that comes with organization and the standardization of this work, um, and creating a less stressful, chaotic environment. I think that that comes a long way when you're talking about like the relationship with the grower and the person who's making these decisions to put automated equipment on their farm. I think that what I don't know if you would call it like the Excel math or the spreadsheet and I can see how this is justified over time with money and like the elimination of the work involved or the elimination of the labor versus the cost of the equipment. I think that oftentimes is really spelled out, but then just the more intangible benefits are what I'm hearing when I talk to people that have the equipment after they use it. It's like just D Murphy, like he's like, um it's like the expression, it's just like I'd never go back to not using this conveyor because I'd ask him the direct questions like, um, would you recommend it or like how do you feel about it? And that's what he was saying.
Yeah.
And then, you know, with someone who's smaller and someone who like Tom was talking about is going at this in an incremental way, starting at hand potting, I think it is going to be, um, it's not going to fit into an overall like business plan, but it's going to be more like, okay, what is the biggest problem that we're facing right here that equipment can solve? And then we keep adding into it. Um, so,
Well,
and
thank
I'm
you,
sure,
Jeffrey. That
yeah,
that's very, I mean, you're talking about kind of like a work environment, right, Jeffrey? It's like you might not see the reallocation of labor savings right away, but rather the work environment, right? The organization of task on how you perform something in a more organized versus a more disorganized way. Okay.
and I think that that's what that's typically what people see and talk about like after they've bought equipment because I think that the like it's easy and it's almost like a given that it's going to be a payoff with respect to eliminating labor and you know that justification. But I think a lot of it's not talked about a lot when you're talking about like the less mathematical benefits, like all the organization, how much more, to use a really like s- like chilled out everything, peers and seems when you're on a line that's got everything running well versus something where you haven't put the thought that you need to. And then that goes back to another thing Tom was saying is like a lot of this is it's like zero cost too. And you can do a lot of just, work and put thought into it. And then you start adding equipment and you get all those benefits that you see when you kind of justify it mathematically with the labor cost, then you're really making a difference.
Excellent. We got time for maybe one more question. And it looks like George has his hand up. So if you'd like to go, George, please do.
Yeah. So I'll sneak in a couple of questions here, but I think
Excellent.
they have short answers. So the first one is, if I understand correctly, you're basically providing this kind of operational consulting for free. Is that and like you're recouping that on sales of equipment? Is that true?
We're more than happy to talk to people at nurseries. And then like I mean, that's what we're here for with respect to the technical details and
Yeah, got
what
you.
they're
So
going to
so you
need.
basically are building up credibility, and I'm sure that doesn't hurt with when it comes to sales time. Um, And then, so in particular, in this case of the conveyor, if you don't mind, how much does a conveyor cost?
So with the recent case acquisition, we've got a lot more conveyors that we offer. Um, for something like this, I would say it's going to be in the $8,000 to $10,000 range,
That's
but
what,
it
10 to 15 on
okay.
options. Yeah. That's a longer conveyor than some of the other ones. You're anywhere from like 7 to 15 or 20, or you can go up from there. There's no end. Just make them longer. Keep going.
Yep.
Um,
And then along with that, do you guys go out and set it up and help them implement the workflow and check on how they're doing? Is that part of the service?
Um, yeah, we'll install equipment depending on what it is and what you work out with us. We've done we've done huge shipping dock conveyors, really long shipping dock conveyors that we went on site to install. And we've also just shipped out a conveyor that's something that people on site are going to be able to build and assemble themselves. So it depends, it's a case by case basis, but if you need that level of like service, then we'll provide it to you.
And then one last question, I promise. Once you have a piece of equipment on a site, do you find that people find new uses for it and just kind of innovate ways of making use of it, or they like set it up and just use it the way it was designed and that's it?
Um, there's a good case of that would be Old Courthouse Nursery in North Carolina. They we got them the same length as this conveyor here, but it was on a chassis that you could tow it around the nursery. Um, there's a lot of creative use. Like you can use those just about anywhere that you would be able to use a conveyor. So, um, you know, I don't. I think that everybody's going to start using their creativity once they have a tool.
Yep. Yeah, very, very cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I will sneak in one last question. So are you all fabricating these things out of whole cloth, or are you purchasing modular parts and then putting them together and then setting them up for the nursery specifically, or sort of both of all of that?
Uh, all of that. Both of all of that for sure, because we do. Um, we've gotten some modular conveyor components in the past, but we're going to start building out some. Ever since we acquired Case, there's some conveyor frames that we have designs for, and we're able to make ourselves. But building out these chassis and these frames, you can make them for different uses. Also, one thing I decided not to include in the presentation, like fully, was there's conveyor systems where you can put a water line inside of or a water tunnel into the line. That's something that we make. And then there's also like soil conveyors and other stuff like that. That's something that we make. And then yeah, but just about every the nursery equipment side of things, like conveyors, potting machines, media processing, we make all of that.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. Let's also thank Jeffrey. Thank you for being our presenter today, and thank you both Tom and Jeffrey and Stilt Pro Equipment for supporting our LEAP grant and working with us to work with growers to adopt automation and save labor. Thank you.
Thank you.